A very good morning to all of you from Southeast Asia and also to our friends in Western Australia, obviously acknowledging the time zone difference even though we're in one country, but also to friends from the rest of Australia and also across the east coast of Australia. As Jan briefly mentioned, my name is Thomson Ch'ng, and I'm from ASEAN-Australia Education Dialogue. But these dialogues actually run out of a corporate advisory and consulting firm with something that I'm attached with as well. It's a firm that has been around for over 30 years now, since 1990. We're a corporate advisory and consulting firm based here in Sydney. But before I start, I should do something that as a tradition for those who are in Australia would understand that, but for the interest of our friends from Southeast Asia, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm currently joining in from, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nations, and to pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Without further ado, I will get my presentation slides up. I'm very pleased to be invited once again by Jen to talk to all of you about a topic that is not just close to my heart, but it's something that I live and breathe every day, and also something that excites me every morning when I wake up, which is about the importance of ASEAN-Australia relationship. Now, I work for ASEAN Focus Group. We are a private consulting firm, so I don't come from a government background. I don't represent any government agency or departments. However, we work very closely with governments because most of our time, our clients includes both the Australian federal and state governments. Certainly policy is something that is very, very important and very close to my heart. So a brief disclaimer, obviously the presentation below information are from reliable sources. I wanted to give credit to DFAT and also ASEAN Secretariat because these are informations that I'll talk to you about, I guess, in a very simple terms, in terms of why government policy matters and why ASEAN-Australia relationship matters. So as Jan has briefly mentioned about ASEAN, and for those of you who may not know, obviously the full name of ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And I'm glad that Jan mentioned that in his opening slides, because I was actually speaking at one of the international webinars last week. And there was one speaker who actually was a very senior person working in one of the foreign university in Malaysia. And even somebody who is as senior as such did not get ASEAN right. I remember the conversations was, she was trying to demonstrate that the university was actually doing a lot of work in ASEAN. And then he went on and said, for example, we've done some work in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Now, if you look at the map here, you would have noticed that, that orange part is actually, if you take out Australia, that is actually where ASEAN is based. So I think it's important for everyone to know the 10 countries of ASEAN. It was founded in 1967 on the 8th of August by 5 countries, which is Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. And then it was signed through what they call a Bangkok Declaration or ASEAN Declaration in Bangkok. And then obviously the rest of the 5 member states, Brunei, Laos, PDR, Vietnam, Myanmar, and Cambodia joined at a later stage. So there are only 10 ASEAN member countries at the moment. And as Jan has briefly touched on the population of ASEAN, 8.7 million, that's, 8.7% of the world population, that's close to 10%. It's pretty significant. Generally a very young population there, and you'll hear more from Michaeli later about the youth aspect. But also the growth rate and also the economy growth rate, GDP, gross domestic product. What does that mean in simple terms? It means there's a higher and higher consumption rate and a growing middle class, which means that more activities and more opportunities for a partner like Australia. Obviously, there are a lot of information on this page, but I just wanted to briefly touch on this this statistic. These are reliable statistics from the ASEAN Secretariat website. If you look at particularly on the education social progress, where you have an increasing and high literacy rate, 95% of adult population was able to read and write, and this is as of 2017. What does that mean? This basically means that there are more opportunities for international education, for employment opportunities, and I think this is a very positive step. And that leads me to the important point about Australia as ASEAN's dialogue partner. Now, a lot of people actually do not understand what you mean by a dialogue partner. Basically, what it means is that it allows Australia as a country to forge that friendly relations and also have that very constructive dialogue about how to cooperate, to tackle some of the issues, which is getting more and more important in today's globalized world, because the pandemic was a good example of why you need global actions and global cooperation to tackle. And Australia, interestingly, of course, is the first of the ASEAN's 10 dialogue partners. So Australia as a country, through the government, has seen that opportunity since 1974. Obviously, there's the list of other dialogue partners, including some of the big economic powerhouses such as China and the United States are also in the list. But also pretty recent, but not quite, is something that happened less than 10 years ago, which is the establishment of an Australian mission to ASEAN in Jakarta, which is where the ASEAN Secretariat is headquartered in. There are a number of regional international economic corporations, and some of the examples are the RCEP, which is that was being signed this last year at the East Asia Summit that was held in conjunction with the Australian and also many other countries' heads of government summits. Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore were obviously active partners, but also there are many minor opportunities or minor partnership agreements that may have been signed in other parts of ASEAN as well. As you know, ASEAN is a very diverse region itself, that government commitment and also government opportunities through international agreements also flows down to sister city agreements, which is signed between local councils, because it is important to have that local connectivity as well, not just at a country level. A good example is actually Georgetown, Penang, which is my hometown where I originally come from. And for those of you who do not know, Penang is located in the northern part of Malaysia. It's often famous with this very scrumptious, delicious food and also its touristy flavor. It actually has a sister relationship. It's the first sister city of Adelaide, in fact, and that was because of the connection with Francis Light and Colonel William Light, which are father and son, which were surveyors of both Georgetown and also Adelaide. For a lot of interesting history there. A quick fact about the Australian residents in the last census in 2016, where we have massive population, 860,000 Australian residents actually claim that ASEAN country is their country of birth. So that gives you some sense in terms of how important the partnership is. Now, ASEAN-Australia Education Dialogue is a track-to diplomacy platform that strengthens Australia's education and training relationship with the key stakeholders region. This is not initiated by the government. It is initiated by ASEAN Focus Group, and I obviously acknowledge the work that my fellow co-conveners, Michael Fay, whom I've been working along with in convening this dialogue. And it was first held in Penang, and it was through the initial support seed funding from the Australia-ASEAN Council from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And it was associated with Special Summit 2018. And we attracted strong representation of key representatives from government, from also education and training providers, and also businesses, but also youth and alumni as well. And these are just some of our key supporters. Of course, I did not list out all of them. There are still many more who are supporting partners of these organizations. Now, the reason why I mentioned about the dialogue is not because it's something that I do as part of the project of the organization, but I wanted to point out the fact that if you look at the point 4 of these key takeaways about participation from non-state players, A lot of the time, we see a lot of government agreements, memorandum of understanding, but at the end of the day, it is really up to non-state players, people like us, like the private firms, like youth, like university, like education providers, to actually take on the opportunities. Otherwise, the otherwise the government international cooperation agreements will end up being just a piece of paper without a very meaningful output. So, and this is pretty much obvious when we initiated the ASEAN-Australia Education Dialogue, and we have very strong support from both the Australian government, but also various state governments in Australia. ASEAN was originally established in 1974 to maintain regional stability. I wanted to point this out just because I think even though there are some challenges recently with one of the member states, such as Myanmar, in terms of internal conflict, but I do think that overall, in general, ASEAN has, as an intergovernmental organization, has played an important role to maintain the regional peace and stability. And this is particularly important if ASEAN is to expand the partnership with other countries, such as Australia. But if you have done, if you've done some research after this, if you look into some of the international government agreements that I've mentioned, a lot of the time you see a lot of common theme there, which is in education and training sector, which is why I think this is very important that this section, and I wanted to give credit to Jan and her team from the Global Student for convening this. I should also mention that Jan has been a key supporter of the ASEAN-Australia Education Dialogue since the very beginning. Not only she attended the dialogue in Penang as a participant, but also one of our facilitators and moderators as well. So I wanted to thank Jan really for being supportive of an important initiative such as the AAED. Last quick point, there was point 3 about diversification of partnership matters. The point that I'm trying to make here is, for those of you who are following closely in terms of Australia's trade relationship with one of the important partners such as China, you would have noticed that it hasn't been easy. It's not a smooth riding since the pandemic, which is why it is important when it comes to international partnership to have a diversified partnership, which includes a region like ASEAN, which is a very peace and very stable region. I'll stop there, Jen, and I'll hand it back over to you. And I'm sure that we can talk more during the Q&A. Thank you.